Y'all listen, I'm gonna try not to keep it long, but I had to get on here and tell you this, that when the enemy turns up the heat, it is not the time for you to act like you're discouraged, okay? It's a time for you to get a pep in your step. It's a time for you to be encouraged. Why? Because when the enemy turns up the heat, that just means he's doing that because you standing on God's word. You ain't trusting and believing what he's saying of those lies. You saying, no, I'm gonna be unwavering. And whenever you're in that space, that lets you know that God is indeed delivering you and he shall indeed promote you. If you don't believe me, go to Daniel the 3rd chapter and read it, y'all. It talks about King Nebuchadnezzar, right? King Nebuchadnezzar forms this idol, this golden idol, right? And what he does, he commands everybody to worship it. But what he does first, he get all the people who are considered to be important. The counselors, the leaders, the treasurers, right? The judges. And he tells them, hey, listen, when you hear all this music being played, I then want you to bow down and then worship this idol. And the reason why he called them first is because the enemy will always want those who have great influence so that they can ensnare those who are ignorant. Because after that, he then went to the regular folk and told them the same thing. When the music is played, bow down to this golden image, this idol. And there they were, the popular folk in the front and the regular folk in the back. The regular folk looking at the popular folk and saying, this must be right because judges are doing it. This must be right because the counselors are doing it. This must be right because the treasurers are doing it. This must be right because the celebrities are doing it. The enemy will always use those who have great influence to make you think that burning sage is a good thing, to make you think that having crystals around your neck and rubbing again, doing shum num 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 to the crystals is a good thing. The enemy will use influencer to make you think that being a good witch is a good thing, that being a bad witch is a good thing. A witch is a witch, and none of it is good in God's sight. None of it is righteous in God's sight. The enemy will have you thinking that practicing necromancy is a good thing. The enemy will make you think that practicing white magic is a good thing. He'll make you think that these things are all good. He'll make you think that sleeping with somebody else's husband is good. He'll make you think that sleeping with somebody else's wife is good. He'll make you think that these things are good. Why? Because the celebrities are doing it. The popular people are doing it. God said, make sure you have discernment. Don't just be following the trend because everybody's doing it. Don't do it. Be wise. Be wise according to the word of God, but not in your own eyes. As God said, don't be wise in our own eyes, but be wise with the wisdom of God. Allow his discernment to guide you. Because a lot of people are being ensnared by a whole lot of idols that they've concocted, and they don't think that they're idols. They think if everybody else is doing it in Hollywood, if everybody else is doing it who has some status behind their name, it must be good. Shuck, the bishop is doing it. He's a Mason. It must be a good thing. Who told it I just step on? The bishop's doing it. The pastors are Masons. My mama, who's an evangelist, she's an AKA. See, the enemy will always make it look like it's popular. And that's why Nebuchadnezzar made that idol out of gold. Why out of gold? Because it's so shiny. It has what? Some value to it. So anything that's gold and shiny, it must be right. Anything that has a little value to it, it must be right. That's the trick of the enemy, y'all. And so that's what that king did. He brought in this golden image and had everybody to bow down. And his decree was this, that if you do not bow down to this image that I have made, this idol that I have made, then I will toss you into the fiery furnace. In other words, I'm going to kill you. And that's what the enemy try to make you think. If you ain't following the trend, that you ain't really living your best life. The devil is a lie. Listen, that music started to play in Daniel 3. And those popular folk, the celebrities, the judges, the counselors, the treasurers, and the regular folk, they began to bow down and worship. And there were a few people that noticed that there were some other people that did not bow down and worship. And so they ratted them out to the king and said, hey, king, we saw some people that were not worshiping. The king said, bring them to me. Now, listen, the king ain't stupid. When he saw who those people were that did not bow down, he knew who they were. Who were they? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were very intelligent, smart, God-fearing people. They were Daniel's buddies, Daniel's prayer partners. So what the king did, he had a little conversation with them and said, hey, listen, maybe you didn't really understand the order that I gave and the decree that I gave. So let me just remind you. I said, when the music is played, that everybody has to bow down to this golden image. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said this, I know you said that, but we believe that our God is the true and living God, and we will not bow down to that idol. We will not bow down to it. That's a false God. We're not going to bow down to it, and therefore, God will deliver us. And if God does not deliver us, we know that we've done the right thing. You know that made the king very highly upset. So what did the king say? The king said this, turn that fire up 7 times hotter. The enemy only turns up the heat when you stand your ground, because it's an intimidation. That was meant to intimidate them. They said, oh, he turned it up 7 times. Maybe we should buckle. No, They did not buckle. They did not break. They were steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the works of God, knowing that their labor would not be in vain. So the enemy tried to use that as a point of intimidation to scare them up, to put fear in them, but they did not buckle, none whatsoever. So what did the king do? The king then said, bound them up. He bound them by the wrist and by their ankles and whatnot. And because the fire was so high, y'all, so hot, y'all, those guards that tossed them into the fiery furnace, they died. That should have been a sign then that, hey, listen, it's something special about these 3, because the guards died, but they didn't die entering in. But no clue, none whatsoever. So here it is where King Nebuchadnezzar, he goes and check on the situation, because he don't hear no, it's hot, we're burning. He don't hear none of that. He don't hear no despair. He don't hear no crying out, help us. He don't hear any of that. None whatsoever. So the king Nebuchadnezzar goes over to the fiery furnace and he looks over in it, right? And then he asked the question. He said, like, did we not toss in 3 bound men into this fire? And the person answered and said, that's true, we did. You tossed in 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were all bound. Here's what the king says. Well, I see 4 loose men walking around in the fire, not no harm to them, no burnt on them. They just walking around having some conversation. That's what they're in there doing. So what happened? Let me read it to you. It says this right here. Daniel 3, I'm at 25. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. They have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, listen, I gotta stop right there. When he saw that the one that was in there, the 4th one, looked like the Son of God, he then called them forth. See, a lot of times you got to stand your ground so God can show up on your behalf. Because when people see the 4th on your side, when they see that you ain't really walking by yourself, that means they got to call you forth. That means that whatever place they try to put you down there, they now got to lift you up. They got to call you forth up out of the pit in what they tried to put you in, which means you're going to find people promoting you now. You're going to find people trying to do good by you now. Why? Because they see the 4th one. They see the one that's walking with you, which is the Son of God. They see Jesus on your side. Listen, let me keep reading because I'm getting real happy right now, y'all. I'm getting real happy. Listen right here. It says, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, and the prince, the governors, the captains, the kings, the counselor, being gathered together, saw these men. Now, these are all the important folk. These are all the celebrities. These are all the ones that had great influence to influence others to do this crazy stuff, right? to bow down to that idol. They see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego coming forth, right? Then it says this, these men upon whose the bodies of fire had no power. The fire had no power. The fire had no power. The fire had no power. Then God said he give us the power over all the power of the enemy, which means whatever weapon the enemy throws at you, you got a greater weapon, that weapon that the enemy toss at you and throw at you and come at you sideways with, that it ain't gonna have no power against you. That's why God said no weapon formed against us shall prosper. Listen up, y'all. Listen up, y'all. It says here, the fire had no power, nor was a hair on their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, which means what? It wasn't no brittleness. There was no burnt spots, no holes. There was nothing going on with their clothing that was changed by that fire. Nothing touched them, okay? Listen, it says this. Their clothes were not changed. It says, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has set his angels and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Did you hear what it said? It changed the king's word. All because they trusted in God. If you continue to trust in God, God will change the lie that the enemy has spoken. God will change that no and turn it into a yes. And then further on, if you read, it says, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You are up for a promotion. So do not give up. Yes, the enemy turned up the heat, but it was only to show God in your life. It was only to show God is working in your life. It is only to prove to other people who doubt or who's following the fake, the phony, and the feign, to show them who the true living God is. Because as you saw here, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not in a space to where they were ever harmed by what was threatening them. You get what I'm saying? So even though the enemy has turned up the heat, you better understand that God has already delivered you. You are loose and you are being promoted. Y'all, I gotta go. You know I love you, but most of all, Jesus loves you too and more. Y'all be blessed. Get ready for the promotion, okay? Y'all be blessed.